Welcome, everyone, to another edition of The Travel Show with your host, Ted Blank. Can I tell you, Ted Blank has become so popular, people are stopping me on the street to ask more about him and how they can take a great trip. Ted, it's great to see you. How have you been?
I've been doing well.
Well, I'm so glad. So if you were like me, the last couple of weeks, I have been glued to the TV watching all things England, and I didn't even know I cared that much about the monarchy, but it's been so fascinating. And when they showed Queen Elizabeth's funeral on TV, it showed this happened here, and then the hearse went through the countryside, and then, well, first of all, the hearse went through from Scotland to England, and then, so it was just really interesting. So you want to talk about England today? I'm so excited.
Yeah, well, a very sad occasion, but I think it gave people a chance to kind of see parts of the island that they'd never even heard of or weren't even aware that existed. So
and the beauty, I think.
And the beauty, incredible beauty. I mean, what a perfect time of the year for, outdoor activities. So it is a beautiful country and lots of beautiful things there. So I thought we could talk a little bit about that.
I would love that. And I know that England is much more than the monarchy, but the monarchy really is important to the tourism piece, isn't it?
It is. And if you look at English history, it's kind of a thread that goes through it, and almost every place you go, you'll find a piece of history related to the monarchy, which goes back, over 1,000 years in Great Britain. So it's been part of that country for a long time. There are lots of attractions and museums and monuments and palaces and castles that people can visit in England that are related to the monarchy.
And I know some people that live in the UK, they talk about how the monarchy perhaps is antiquated and out of date and out of touch, and why should we be funding it? But it's my understanding that it really only costs, let's say, a couple dollars per person to keep funding it, and then it brings in so much revenue through tourism.
Yeah, I think it does. And, if you've been to other places in Europe, and you've seen royal palaces that are disused, and they've just turned into museums or art galleries, they're interesting, but they're kind of flat. Mm-hmm. And so being in Britain, where you can see that these things are still used.
The changing of the guard.
Changing of the guard, and there's someone that they're guarding there. I think it really adds a lot of color to it, and it's the reason a lot of Americans want to go to Britain on vacation, despite the fact that in 1776 we chose a different path. So, maybe we regret that in our deep subconscious.
I don't know. It seems like we've made up as countries.
Yeah, we have. Yes,
so I think it's
we get
all
along
good.
Pretty well. Yeah.
So when somebody comes to you and says they would like to go on a trip, is this a trip that you would recommend for a certain kind of family, person, couples? Who is a good trip to England?
Britain is actually great for pretty much anybody. They speak English there. Kind of. There are some places where the accent is so strong
Come again?
Exactly. You might have a little hard time understanding it. We were talking to somebody from Glasgow in Scotland once, and I didn't realize he was speaking English. So parts of the accent can be very, very thick. But from that perspective, it's easier than other European countries. And there just is so much. If your kids are into Harry Potter is British. So there's all the Harry Potter stuff there. If you're into fashion and food or culture, the museums are incredible. The culinary scene is incredible. So there really is something for everyone, but I think your path will cross the royal path several times as you explore the country.
So if you're putting together a trip just to England, what is a good amount of time for people to be actually on ground in England?
Yeah, so if you just want to see England, so not Scotland, not Ireland, not Wales, 7 to 10 days is a good length of time. Mm-hmm. If you want to do something a little more expansive, I'd say 10 to 14 days is a good length of time. So if you've got 2 weeks, you can see a lot.
Tell us what you would recommend putting together for people.
I thought it would actually be interesting just to kind of take a review of this path that the Queen took after she died, and kind of talk about some of those places. So she passed away at a castle called Balmoral, and Balmoral is in northern Scotland. So if you get out your map of England and go just about as far north as you can go, that's where Balmoral is. And it's in the Scottish Highlands. And this is a really remote, pretty unpopulated part of Britain that's absolutely full of breathtaking scenery. It's one of the most scenic, remote places on Earth. And you can understand why somebody who spent their whole life kind of in the glare of cameras would want some place where, you could just go and blend into the countryside and not meet your raving fans no matter where you went to. So that's why the Balmoral was built by Queen Victoria and her husband. And so you can actually visit the castle. It is open to the public when the royal family isn't in residence. And you're also not too far from Loch Ness. If you want to go see the monster, if you get a picture, send it to us. We'd like to see that. This is whiskey territory, Scottish whiskey and Scottish scotch, and golf. Actually, you're not too far from St. Andrews if you wanted to go golfing. So that area of Scotland, quite beautiful. Some interesting tourist circuits up there that you can go on that make it a definite must to see that scenic side of the country.
Couple things about that area. I think it's actually quite lovely that the Queen passed away at Balmoral because she seemed like she really loved that area so much. It was her favorite
place, yeah.
And there's some comforter in that, I think. Yeah. And then the other funny story, as you mentioned how remote it was, there is all these stories coming out about the Queen, anecdotal things, and there was a story about American tourists. Did you hear that story?
I heard that, and they saw her, and what they didn't believe it was her.
No, they didn't even know it was her. And said, we understand that the Queen lives nearby. And her driver said she lives up there. And so they said, have you ever seen her, to the driver? And the driver said, I see her all the time. And so they wanted their picture taken with the driver. So they asked the old lady that was with them. Would she take their picture?
The Queen took their picture. That is pretty funny. That is pretty fun. It's interesting. Queen Victoria, who was her predecessor, actually she passed away at her favorite place too. And it was a castle on the Isle of Wight, which is like the exact opposite end of the island. It's as far south as you can go. And it's a place called Osborne House. And if you are taking a cruise from Southampton in England, it's worth hopping on the ferry and hopping across to the Isle of Wight to see Osborne House, because it's basically been preserved as it was when Queen Victoria passed away. And so it's a museum now. It's a public museum. It has some incredible gardens. You can see the playhouse, the tree house that the royal children got to play in. My tree house wasn't quite that big. But it's very, very interesting thing that you can go and see. So again, that royal history is kind of everywhere you go.
Intertwined, right. Yep. So then she made her way down to
Edinburgh, to the capital of Scotland. Scotland is a part of the United Kingdom, but it has a little bit of a distinct identity. And so Scotland had its own monarchy until right after Elizabeth I died. And when she died, she didn't have any children. And so I think it was her nephew or maybe her cousin inherited both thrones. And that's when those two countries began the merger together that exists today. So there is a royal palace in Edinburgh, where the Queen or the King lives when they're in residence, and it's called the Palace of Holyrood House, and it's also open to the public when it's not being used for royal, as a royal residence, so you can go see that. And then the Cathedral, where the lying in state took place, it's called St. Giles Cathedral, and Scotland has a little different version of the Protestant faith than they have in England. So they're Presbyterians in Scotland. So it's a little bit different than the churches you saw like Westminster Abbey and St. Paul's Cathedral. And then Edinburgh Castle is the massive dark fortress that looms over everything in the city. And so it's this medieval castle with cannons and dungeons and all that kind of interesting stuff there. So Edinburgh is well worth a visit when you're in Great Britain.
And then from there, was it a train ride?
I think they flew down to London. And of course, we've all seen these places on TV. Some of the main attractions that you would have seen, certainly Buckingham Palace, where the Queen lived. And again, parts of that are actually open to the public during the summer season. And I think that something that has been pointed out in the press is that perhaps that will become a little more extensive in the future, and there'll be more opportunities for the public to view Buckingham Palace. But you can actually view some of the staterooms and the throne room and the dining room, as well as the gardens. So quite a attraction if you're in London when it's open. Changing of the guard, of course, takes place every day in the summer, every other day in the off-season. And then you can actually walk down that big, wide boulevard in front of Buckingham Palace that we would pronounce it the Mall. They pronounce it the Mall, but it's one of the most impressive ceremonial streets in the world. And then, of course, we saw Westminster Abbey, which is the church where the funeral was held. Absolutely fascinating to visit. It's still an active church, so there are still church services there. But many famous non-royal British people are buried in Westminster Abbey. And so there's an area called the Poets' Corner, where some famous writers are. That is where their Tomb of the Unknown Soldier is. And it's where the kings and queens have been crowned since 1066, when William the Conqueror came over from France and took the crown away from the old Saxon king. Across the street from it are the Houses of Parliament, which the proper name for that is actually the Palace of Westminster. So it's a royal palace. And Westminster Hall is the room where the Queen's body lied in state. And so it is basically it's sort of a large assembly hall. It's not where Parliament normally meets. They use it as kind of a satellite meeting area, but quite a impressive and very historic place. And if you know your history, there was a time when England didn't have a king. And that's when the rebels under Oliver Cromwell beheaded King Charles I. And that actually happened in Westminster Hall as well. So a lot of history in this particular place. It didn't last very long. They kind of decided that the alternative was better, and so they restored the monarchy after that. But a lot of British history, and a lot of the history that came down to America through our founding made its way through Westminster Hall and through the British Houses of Parliament. So well worth visiting. Tourists can actually go and see debates in the House of Commons or the House of Lords. So they are open to the public as well. So lots of neat things you can see or do related to that royal funeral. And then, of course, they took the last stage was to go to Windsor Castle. And Windsor Castle is about 40 miles outside of London. It's actually very near Legoland. So if you get tired of palaces and castles and things like that, you can go to Legoland, and they have a Legoland there. It's actually very near Heathrow Airport, too. So if you are looking for a place to stay before you head home, you can stay in Windsor. Windsor Castle, it was originally actually built by William the Conqueror, so it's over 1,000 years old, and it was kind of the main out-of-town residence of Queen Elizabeth. And again, it is open to the public. Large parts of it are. The chapel, St. George's Chapel, where the final funeral was held, is open to the public. I don't believe that the royal crypts are open. I don't think you can go there, but the chapel itself is open. And there are some really neat things in Windsor Castle. And one of them is a dollhouse. And it was a dollhouse given to Queen Elizabeth's grandmother, Queen Mary, and it's called Queen Mary's Dollhouse. And it is one of the most incredible reproductions of sort of a Downton Abbey style mansion built in the I think it was put together in the 1930s, and it's just so incredibly detailed. And every room, I mean, the detail is just breathtaking. And it's in kind of a climate controlled glass case, but you can walk around it and you just look at it, and the complexity of it and the amount of work that went into creating this toy essentially is really, I don't know if the kids ever got to actually play with it.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
But it's a really neat thing to do. And of course, Windsor Castle also has a lot of pieces of the royal collection there. The archives of the monarchy are there. So there are a lot of historical artifacts you can see as you go on tours of it as well. So you can kind of make your way up and down the island and see the sights that you would have seen on TV in the last 2 weeks.
And where is Princess Diana buried?
So she's actually buried at her family's home. It's called Althorpe, and it's actually not too far from Windsor. And interestingly enough, there is a hotel in London that offers a package. And if you would like to go stay at the castle with the Earl and his wife as their guests, you can do that. Now, if you have to ask how much it costs, you can't afford it. But if you are really, a fan of Princess Diana and you really want an opportunity to live in a castle for a night with a bona fide earl, that's something I can arrange for you.
Interesting.
Yep. So, yeah, now a lot of opportunities to tour castles and see them, and many of them are open to the public in some way, shape, or form. A lot of them have concerts and art galleries and things that have been added to make them, interesting places for people to go to. So that's really part of visiting England and Scotland and the countryside, is to see some of those castles, some of which are quite ancient and some of which are quite new, but it's kind of a thing to do. But if you want to sleep in an earl's castle, let me know and we can set that up.
So were castles necessarily for people that were in the royal family, or weren't they just sometimes a fortress?
Yeah, so you have to remember that, the nobility generally ran the country. And so the dukes and the earls and the lords had castles, big and small. And back in the day, they were fortified because they needed to be fortified. Over time, most of the walls got pulled down and they got replaced by the moats got filled in. And, the British have some incredible gardens. They have kind of a damp climate, but the gardens and stuff at some of these castles are quite impressive. And so it's worth seeing that as well when you're there. And in fact, if you're into gardening, there are some really neat things you can do in the spring. There's a place near London called Kew Gardens. And Kew Gardens hosts the annual Royal Botanic Show, which is like that Bachman's flower exhibit. Remember they used to have in the old Dayton's?
On steroids.
On steroids. So it's all that kind of really neat, crafted displays that you can walk around to and just revel in the beauty of a English spring. I've had some folks do that, and they've really come back with great memories of the beauty of England in the spring.
And what is a good time for us to visit England?
Well, the one thing I always like to tell people is that it always rains in England. So no matter when you go, it's probably going to rain. So bring an umbrella. I like spring. I think fall is another good time to go. Summer, it's going to be hotter. You can get some pretty severe thunderstorms in the summer there, just like we do. And if you want to save a little money, going in the winter isn't necessarily a bad idea. London really pulls out a lot of stops at Christmas. So all the department stores, they decorate the front windows, and you can go have afternoon tea at the Ritz or at Fortnum and Mason or at Harrods, and they do some neat Christmas themed stuff. Everything's decorated for Christmas. So that's kind of a neat time to go as well. So there's really no bad time to go, but weather-wise, I tend to think probably spring and fall are the best times to go.
And you can help us put together the trip of our dreams?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's one of my favorite places to plan trips to because, a lot of people have family connections there as well. Maybe they had a child who went to college there, or perhaps they had a loved one who during the Second World War or even the First World War served in England or in Britain before they went over to the continent. So a lot of people have family reasons they want to go back there, and there just is so much to do. It's not a place you're going to go once and say, okay, been there, done that. It's the kind of place you can go back to again and again and keep seeing new things every time you go.
How can people get a hold of you, please?
Yeah, the best way to get a hold of me is to give me a call at 651-964-8245, or you can visit my website, tedblanktravel.com, and you can also subscribe to my e-newsletter there, or you can visit me on Facebook at facebook.com/tedblanktravel.
Great to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you so much. Ted Blank, he is the host of The Travel Show, heard on AM 1460 and FM 97.7 KDWA in Hastings. This travel show has been brought to you by Ted Blank, Luxury Travel and Adventures.